they might have heard the talking points along the way, but rarely is the whole picture ever put together and presented in a way cohesively that helps you understand.
So, we're gonna use the KISS strategy. Keep it simple, stupid.
Okay.
As we go through, as we move downstream here, because this could be a much broader topic, and we've talked about that, right? We could probably go back as far as we could think, and we could make it about a lot of things, from the Obama-Biden administration to the election, to January the 6th, to the Ukrainian war. And although they're all tied in, we don't want to make it difficult to follow along. And we don't want this video to be 15 hours.
Yeah.
Right? So we're going to try to be as clear as possible, while also, I bring that up, while also we might bring up points that are back here, right? That exist back in the Obama-Biden administration or surrounding the election to January the 6th, to the Ukraine war, right? So we might talk about points there, but we're going to try to keep the topic. And the first topic is going to be January 6th or Ukraine war. Which one?
I think you got to start with Ukraine.
Okay, let's start with Ukraine and we'll move backwards.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, but
no, they're all tied. It's tied in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I see why you're saying that, because we have the Ukraine war now. Russia invade. It's a full out war. I guess they're calling it, and that's happened under Biden. But there's a Ukraine situation.
Yes.
That kind of certainly shows up in the Trump administration.
Yes.
But what we're saying is it goes back farther,
right?
And it's at the heart of a lot of what's going on.
So if we're going to start there, and you're about to start expanding quickly as I bring these points up, I want to bring up a couple of points that I find very helpful in talking about the Ukraine war. Some things that we know, right? I think it's always helpful to talk about things that we know, okay? And then from there, we can start to expand this. But this is not something we necessarily know, but we pretty much know that Ukraine was a piggy bank, right? It's a piggy bank in a lot of ways, and we're going to talk about that. Also, Biden was Obama's point man in the Ukraine through the administration, right? So he was the point man in Ukraine. So we have a past there. We also know that Biden's son worked in the Ukraine. Okay, so Hunter worked in the Ukraine. Worked. There's a lot going on over there with the Bidens. That's all. Before this war began, there's been a big history with the Bidens in the Ukraine. That's all I'm bringing this up, right? Now, we also have other things such as Tony Bobulinski, right? And I know you'll want to touch on this more, bringing up, Hunter Biden and the big man, right? The big man and money that was being funneled out of the Ukraine. We also have video of Biden. This is mind-blowing to me. I'd just seen this. Dustin had seen it a long time ago. Shame on me. On C-SPAN, telling the Foreign Relations Committee that he had a Ukrainian, he didn't say it, but someone fired, and because they fired somebody, he gave them taxpayers' money, right? Now, we're going to tie all this in to help you understand it, but it was kind of mind-boggling to me that we have this on video of him saying, son of a bitch, right? I got this guy fired, and I told him you're not going to get these billions of dollars if you don't fire him. And we don't really know what he's talking about fully. We do now, but we didn't at the time. And so I just wanted to bring all that up because a lot of things have happened recently that we can tie all these things in. Not to mention in that video, Michael Carpenter, right? Who now we know is the senior director at the Penn Biden Institute, which has been in the news recently. Why? Because They had classified documents at the Penn Biden Institute.
Motherlode.
Right, the motherlode of classified documents. So all of that, right? These are just things that we know. And we won't talk about the Obama-Biden embassy working with the Soros team. I didn't bring that up simply because that's, that could be a much bigger conversation. But with all of those points that we know, let's kind of trampoline off that, things that we know, and start to tie those points in so people can understand how to make sense of those things, especially the past that the Bidens have had in the Ukraine. I mean, that's as simple of a place to begin as any.
Well, if we just start like a year or so ago, when the current military conflict in Ukraine, between Ukraine and Russia, began, and there begins to be this, certainly in the United States, a whole campaign around supporting Ukraine, and all of a sudden everyone is a diehard Ukraine supporter and got the flag waving everywhere. And the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, now is like a national hero for us, and it's just nonstop propaganda, even to build up support for this war, because Russia invaded Ukraine, or that's the premise. But but to understand, to not just be caught up in this moment like so many people have been, and to understand more of the history of the situation, not just a long-standing history that brings us to this moment geopolitically, in terms of these other nations and their relationship with each other, and European politics, NATO politics, all that stuff. But like you've mentioned, there's a very direct connection to Biden, as well as many other U.S. politicians.
As direct as it gets, in your face,
in
direct,
Ukraine, which actually, we'll see is just an example. This is just the Ukraine is just like a test case, or one example of the games they play, the way they are scheming all over the world in other foreign countries, and the corruption runs deep. But I'd say it's probably, I imagine it's pretty deep, and
well, and there's so many special interests involved, right? There's so many special interest groups involved in getting a piece of this pie, which is why there's such a cover-up trying to be involved with it, right? Like, one of the things for me, take this Ohio incident, right? This train derailment in Ohio. This is a big deal for me. We're in the middle of we're halfway to an election, right? 2024 election. You should be doing everything possible to be working towards re-election, right? Whether it's Biden or the Democratic Party or whatever. And you have one of the biggest national disasters that we've had, maybe since the hurricane in New Orleans, Katrina, right? Maybe since Katrina, and probably bigger than Katrina in terms of the future problems that we're going to have, considering the contaminants that were in the train. And the president is in Europe rather than in Ohio, specifically the Ukraine. And so for me, I'm going, okay, what could have your attention over there? Like, what is going on that is so important over there, above and beyond being reelected? Because this was a massive fail for reelect. I mean, you need to win that corridor of the country, right? You got to win Michigan, Wisconsin, Ohio, all those groups. You got to win that if you're going to win the presidency. Mm-hmm. And he allows Trump to get out in front of him up there, bring transfer trailer loads worth of stuff. He doesn't send FEMA. Like, Trump beats FEMA there, right? And it's like, what could be so important? Well, when you start to consider, again, he was the point man for 8 years under Obama. Hunter Biden had a business there, had jobs there, and all the other information surrounding all that, you go, oh, well, this is what's so important. Like the Ohio incident is nothing compared to what's going on in the Ukraine if it comes out. Like there is no reelect possibility if what's going on in the Ukraine actually surfaces and people start to discover there's massive special interest groups tying into this piggy bank in the Ukraine. And it just so happens that one of them in the past is the United States president now and his family, right? And so not good for them. And Trump being this outsider comes in, you know, whether you like Trump or not, he's this outsider coming in that's like, I don't need your money. Like, I'm not tied in to these special interest groups in the Ukraine because first, I don't need your money. And second, I'm an outsider. Like, I haven't been in this game for the last 30 years. Would Trump have been involved if he was? Maybe. I don't know. Right? Maybe. But he's not been because he is an outsider coming in. And like, well, we can't have outsiders. So, again, we're not just saying this is just Biden. There's plenty of Republican Congress members that are tied into this piggy bank as well. Right? This is why they say it. You shouldn't hang around Washington, D.C. when you get out of politics because you're going to get tied into these special interest groups at some level.
So question, why has Russia said that they are invading Ukraine? Do you know that? Does anybody know that? Why has Russia said that they're invading Ukraine?
So one of them, but I don't think this is the point you're going towards.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not even sure that we ever hear that.
So one of them was they said that was the beginning stages of the COVID virus. Right. Now, again, this wasn't out of the mouth of Putin, but that's where the COVID virus began in terms of facility and cooking it up, let's say.
Yeah, well, and that's definitely the newer, more controversial one. If your assumption might be, and I'd say it is relevant, of course, but people's assumption is it's kind of because Russia is right on the border with Ukraine and
Cuban Missile Crisis.
Yeah, Ukraine is a former Soviet state, and so they have a long-standing history being linked together. There are many Russian-speaking people, many culturally Russian people on the eastern side of Ukraine. There's a very strategic port area that connects to the sea, and so there's access that that territory is always being fought over, and typically Russia's trying to annex that into Russia or have their influence and control over it, and so that's valid. I'm sure that's part of it. And then
they have a lot of great resources, right? Breadbasket of Eastern Europe.
Ukraine. Yeah, sure. They have historically been in the middle of the broader, the more the longer history is, of course, the European nations trying to contain the spread of communism, and so when the Soviet Union falls, then they put in place the NATO military bloc to prevent the spread of communism or the Soviet system anywhere else.
Very defensive. I think that's an important. NATO was always defensive.
It was
now
meant to be defensive.
Now it's
that
becoming
was the idea.
offensive.
I don't know if it was. I say meant to be. It was always packaged as that.
Yeah.
But through the decades, the NATO countries have increasingly expanded eastward. They've expanded their military presence into countries that were supposed to be neutral. They've tried to bring in the there's probably terminology here. We're not sophisticated enough to know all the right words and things, but those border countries are the ones that create that buffer that are supposed to be neutral. They've recruited one after another to become a part of the European Union. And so there's been this encroachment, it's a slow encroachment, but also obvious and provocative toward Russia that in spite of the agreement that they had, they're expanding eastward. And so that's antagonistic at its heart. That goes against the treaties that were set up. So, it's very provocative actions that are downplayed or dismissed or always covered with, well, we're just trying to be, democratic and spread our values, while Russia is having to, pretty much take it along the way.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they might try to do their things, but what are they going to stand up against?
Well, how would we feel
States?
if Russia set military bases along the Mexico border?
Yeah, sure.
with nuclear weapons? How would we feel about that?
Yeah.
Right? Just like the Cuban Missile Crisis, which is why I brought it up, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what we told Russia. We said, no, you're not going to put a military base in Cuba and have access to long-range weapons sitting right in our backyard. It's not going to happen. And basically, Russia's saying the same thing. No, you're not going to put a military base right on our border and have access to long-range weapons. Like, it's not going to happen, right? So we can, put your feet in their shoes. Like, they want the same thing we didn't want. Right? So you can understand that. That's not difficult to understand.
I'm sure there's, you can make it more complicated. You could talk about more things, but that's a basic circumstance that creates the setting.
Yeah.
And this is an ongoing history, but then also you have during the you have a history of revolutions, and some would say they're democratic revolutions throughout Eastern Europe and throughout this area. Others will call them color revolutions. Many of them have had like color names, Orange Revolution, and these kind of things that have happened. So there's a history, and there's the history of George Soros and his connection to these kind of revolutions happening throughout Eastern Europe in the way they finance these things, and they when the West doesn't like the leader that's in place who's not going along with their agenda, then they finance the opposition populist group, and then they start stirring up a ruckus, a populist movement to replace, and then they fund this group to ultimately overthrow and replace what was the democratically elected government oftentimes. But then there's an overthrow so that democracy can happen.
Would you say that the propaganda that's been happening surrounding the Ukraine and the United States is as much to persuade the Ukrainian people to be on the side of Europe and America over Russia as it is for Americans? Meaning, like, we're trying to get the Ukrainian people to be antagonistic to Russia and not like the idea of being a part of Russia, whereas we're flying your flag, we're supporting you, be more like us, right? Would you say it's as much about winning support from the Ukrainian people as it is about winning support from Americans or people in Europe?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's an information war around it all, and that propaganda influences the people there, and depending on where your kind of loyalties already are, what part of the country that you're based in, how you perceive it. You could be. I know there are Ukrainians who, are on both sides of this.
Yeah, I mean, there's a war to be won in the hearts and mind of Ukrainians. Like, are we really for the West? Like, we haven't been a part of NATO, but now all of a sudden, like, if I was a Ukrainian, I'd be sitting here at least going, they've never cared about us since now. Like, this is like a new thing. No one's like, why now? Why do you want to make us part of NATO now? Right? Like, and I would at least be sitting there going, I feel like we're being used in some way. Right? I feel like somebody's using us here. Yeah. I wouldn't be just completely persuaded. And I think you would find it hard. I think you would find it to be hard to find a Ukrainian that feels like the West and America is just out of the kindness of their heart in the Ukraine right now. Whether they understand why we are or aren't, I still think they're just kind people. They just want to be over here with us, right?
Well, the propaganda is very effective.
Sure.
I mean, it is in our own country when we ought to know better, but even those who I mean, it's just there's so many angles you can get caught up in. It's hard to discern. I mean,
If you
that's what we're
polled,
talking
if
about
you
all the
polled
time.
the American people, and you brought up the fact that Biden was the point man in the Ukraine for the 8 years under the Biden administration, and that Hunter Biden, again, worked in the Ukraine, how many people you think would know that? Those two pieces of information.
Yeah, not many, and I don't think people put it all together. They may hear the bits of information, but probably a lot of people aren't sitting trying to analyze these things to the degree that even we do, and therefore they might have heard the talking points along the way, but rarely is the whole picture ever put together and presented in a way cohesively that helps you understand. But then, so if you look during the Obama administration, the U.S. was involved with helping fund and encourage one of these color revolutions in Ukraine, where the previous elected president was overthrown and replaced through a popular mass revolt. And
Zelensky's the end product of that.
Yeah, he wasn't the immediate successor.
Right.
But, you know.
King Saul, King David type stuff.
But then he comes along and becomes the next elected president after the immediate replacement.
I heard that it was the fairest and freest election ever in the Ukraine.
And you have during that you have the U.S. funding the militias, the groups that are working to overthrow the Ukrainian government, and we're giving them weapons, we're sending money, we're doing all that during the Obama administration. You got
a lot of monies went to
John
Ukraine.
McCain and Lindsey Graham are famously involved there. Other senator level people for sure. But it just to the point that the history there goes back. And therefore, when Trump comes into office, and so like you've made the point, during this time is when Obama makes Biden the point man for Ukraine, meaning he's kind of the leader there. Mm-hmm. He's appointed by Obama to be the main representative, the highest level representative for the U.S. government, and so he's very involved in Ukraine along with.
And so you're floating around in the middle of the Ukraine, right? Where already there's a lot of special interest happening there. Right?
Ukraine is known to be one of the most corrupt places.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, like ran by mobsters.
Yeah, and you're sitting here and you're the vice president of the United States. And you're already, you don't have a high level of integrity, right? We know this from Joe Biden's past, right? No one would have said Joe Biden is a man of integrity, right? If you looked at his career, and you're floating around in the middle of Ukraine and you find a way to pick up a couple of $1 million that you feel like's untraceable. Yeah. Right. I mean, yeah. Why not? Right. I mean, like, why not? And then you start to tie all this in, right?
Well, how does that work? Just while we're on that point, how do you think?
How do I think this one worked?
Well, how does it work when our politicians, the special interest groups, when they are involved in what's going on in other countries, how is that all?
So I would say
where's the money flowing? How's it getting back to the?
I would say it kind of works. Let's use like a more national perspective, and then we'll expand it into an international perspective, because I think that it's a little bit easier on the national perspective. So I'm in Congress, right, and I'm working hand in hand with lobbyists in Congress. And we're making deals, and it's like, hey, if you'll give me this, I'll provide you with a speaking engagement that's going to pay you $250,000, or, I'll make sure that you have a position here when you're done, or right. I mean, so there's ways in which it looks legal, right? I mean, it looks legal.
A book deal when you get out of office. A book deal
when you get out of office, right? I mean, there's a lot of things that they can do to make sure that you're well taken care of. But what I need you to do in the meantime is A, B, C, D, and E, right? Now,
make sure this legislation passes that is advantageous to us, our interests. Make sure this funding gets allocated that's going to end up over here.
Yes. So people wonder, how do politicians get rich when they're only supposed to be making 180 to 200, a quarter million a year? That's how they do it, right? And that's why they say you shouldn't hang around Washington when you get out of office, right? So there ought to be some laws in place that keep politicians from doing those kind of things, right? That would be very helpful to the direction of our nation if those kind of things were nipped in the bud. But they're not. They're not, and they happen all the time. So how much more so can the money get bigger and be more hidden internationally, right? It's, hey, I need A, B, C, and D, and I know you're the vice president, and I might have a job for your son on this board over here. Yeah, we know he doesn't know anything, and he's got a problem with hookers and drugs, but he don't really have to know anything because we don't want it for him, and we'll funnel some money through him at the tune of $500,000 a year, and he can give some to the big guy, according to Tony Bobulinski, right? And we can do that. That'll work. And then if you got some classified documents at the Penn building, you could send us some of those too, and you could give those to Hunter, and he could kind of hand them to us, and that might help us with some things. And then when we get in trouble, we're going to call you and say, hey, there's this Ukrainian prosecutor over here, and he's kind of stirring up some trouble. He knows about Hunter. They share the same prostitute. They're doing some drugs together. Hunter don't know how to keep his mouth shut. Now he's looking into things. If you get him fired, that'd be really great because this is going to get problematic. Yeah, I'll do it, and then I'll brag about it on C-SPAN because these dumbasses don't know anything anyways. Right? So it's like there, right? There's just an example. Yeah. Not saying any of that's true. I'm just laying out kind of
could look
something like that.
Well, you have.
Sorry for the asses.
I mean, you have Burisma, which is a Ukrainian energy company who's known to, already be.
And by the way,
corrupt.
The media is not going to cover any of it, right? So let's just throw that out there. They're well protected by the media and the FBI because you're going to look heavily into Trump's classified information, which he says is declassified, which he has every right to do. But you're not going to look into Joe's at all, which he was the vice president. He shouldn't have any of it, right? So sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. I'm just saying. So the FBI is going to look at Trump, but not Hunter. The media is going to cover Joe. The media is going to cover Trump, but not Joe. And they're going to let it die, right? So you have the media, you have the FBI, you have the alphabet agencies on your side. So you feel very well protected because they're all involved in this piggy bank, right? They all have a hand in the piggy bank. So they're all together in the corruption. So they can't expose it. They can't. If they do, they're just exposing themselves, right? So it's like, well, that would be stupid, right? So that's why they're not on each other's team because they just love each other more than they love Trump or these other people. I'm using Trump, but there's other people that desire to expose this stuff, right? Lake, right, over in Arizona. There's other politicians that see the corruption and they're sick of it, and that's why they get the most heat. But they're all on the same team because they're unified in their corruption, not because they like each other. They all got their hand in the same cookie jar. And to call one person out. Now, if they can dump on Joe and feel like they can get away with it, if they can dump on Joe Biden and feel like they can get away with it, they will. I'm looking for that to happen these last 2 years. Let's dump it all on the Bidens, and we can get a clear path to keep all this going and throw Joe and them under the bus. I could see that happen.
Yeah, and they may try to do it. I don't think that they'll ultimately be able to because just in this it wouldn't surprise me certainly but still the way that the whole deep state system is tied up in the Ukraine situation, it is a great example to help illustrate and understand just what's happening all the time everywhere.
This drill's in my left ear, just people are working next door, obviously.
What a day to record.
Yeah.
So,
but you're talking about Burisma.
Yeah, if you just look at that, because that begins to reveal itself before this full-blown controversy. So in that we see, and this is before the 2020 election, this information begins to be made known and surface really during Trump's administration. Trump is aware of some of this corruption that's happening. It's very evident, and it is scandalous because, like we've said, at the end, on their way out the door in the Obama-Biden administration, they had been taken advantage, and so now and you have certain forces that are trying to expose the corruption in Ukraine, and so you have what's the equivalent of their attorney general who has investigations going on some of these issues. I'm not sure if it's on Hunter Biden directly or just people tied to the company, and it's getting too close to home, and so Biden exerts his influence and has that lead prosecutor, basically the attorney general of Ukraine, fired.
Yeah.
He holds it over their head.
And then he brags about it.
Yeah, you're not going to get this $1 billion of aid unless...
From taxpayers.
Yeah, our money is not going to go to Ukraine unless this lead prosecutor is fired. And he brags, you got 6 hours before I leave to make your decision.
Well, son of a bitch.
He got fired. And
that's what he says, by the way. I wasn't just saying that.
Yeah. And people may have seen that quote, but it's been circulating. It's been there.
Oh, it's not hidden. It's right in front of your face.
Like you said, you had not.
No, I had not really seen it, and it blew my mind. I was like, why have I not seen this?
But that video has been there since before the 2020 election. And these pieces were able to be put together. And so
Michael Carpenter's on stage with him, who is the senior director at the Penn Biden Institute, where the classified documents were found. Right, so you're putting these pieces.
He's a close aide and assistant to Biden in the Obama administration.
Right. So you're putting all this together.
Yeah, he's closely tied to this. So these things are understood by Trump. So during Trump's administration, he makes the famous perfect phone call, according to him, to Zelensky, asking Zelensky to look into some of these issues. Yeah. And the call was recorded, and that's when the whistleblower came forward and said that Trump was trying to do what Biden had already done.
Because that's what they do. You need to understand that. If they are trying to convince people that you're doing something, it's because they're already doing it. You have to understand that part of it. Like, if they're pointing that you're doing this, it's because they're doing it.
Yeah. And so Trump makes that call, tells Zelensky he hopes he'll look into the Biden corruption, and then that's the phone call that Trump, in his first impeachment, that's what they were trying to impeach him for. That's what they say. That was the pretext for trying to impeach Trump. But you see through that Trump is on to them. Trump knows what the situation is.
Sure.
He's not blowing it up out of the water entirely in the media in every way that he possibly could, but he is actually pretty masterful, and through the whole ordeal, bringing the situation to the forefront. He provides the transcript of his perfect phone call that we can read in it and see actually what his interest was, not going after Biden, his political opponent, but going after to look into the corruption of the former vice president and his son, who's very intimately tied to some corruption.
Well, the cop doesn't go arrest the drug dealer on the street, on the corner. He uses the guy on the corner to find the big time guy, right? The big drug dealer. I don't know. I'm not in the realm of drug dealers. I don't know what the terminology would be, but he uses him to try to move up the ladder, right? Sure. So you don't, again, a great tactician, someone that is trying to work their way through it, you don't just come out and say, this is what's happening. You use that information to continue to move up the ladder, to continue to find and discover more things that are happening. And so something interesting to me around the whole situation is how it's being framed up in the media, right? Because, you have the Ukraine and Joe Biden and the left coming together, and then you have Trump and Russia right, being framed together. And this is how it's been for a long time now, right? You have Putin and Trump. They must be in together about something. Yeah, maybe they are. Maybe they are coming together about something, and maybe they want to work together to solve some problems, and maybe those problems are all about the left and the Ukraine. And again, there's more special interest on the right that are involved too, but maybe they are buddy for a reason. And it has nothing to do with why they're telling you that they're buddy, right? It has nothing to do with that. It has everything to do with something else. But because you don't know what that something else is, they're able to convince you that, Trump and Putin, there must be something like corrupt, the Steele dossier or something like Russian collusion, right? And so it must be something surrounding the election or something nonsensical that has zero evidence, rather than just looking at things we're laying out that you can find too, unless you're on Google or YouTube, and then you have to scroll like 50 lines down to try to find anything on those two platforms, which again is the problem, right, surrounding this. But yeah, I mean, this is laid out right in front of your face.
It goes all the way. I mean, certainly it begins showing up in the Russia collusion narrative as soon as Trump is elected, because it all goes back to Ukraine, because you have these interests that we've been talking about on one side that are involved in Ukraine, but then you also have the pro-Russia side of Ukraine, and those were some of the lobbying interests that the Trump campaign advisor Paul Manafort was connected to, and those are the things they begin to point to and say, are really problematic for
which
the
would
Trump
be
campaign.
Soros's business opponent, right?
yeah. So kind of the opposing side, perhaps, within Ukraine, and so, but then there's also through that they know that there's an awareness from Trump and his team about what's going on in Ukraine from the very, very beginning. They're afraid that their corruption is going to be exposed from the very beginning. So they begin to accuse Trump of dealing with Russia in a shady way, when all the time they've been dealing in Ukraine in this shady way. And so then that narrative continues to develop, and all the while they're trying to protect these certain interests they have. And so when Trump makes his phone call to Zelensky, then they start the impeachment. This is to shut Trump up. They're just desperate to try to find a way. If that ever seemed odd to you, how that whole impeachment ordeal came about because of a phone call to Ukraine, I mean, what's the
implications to that?
That seemed like a stretch. Like, why are they trying so hard on this particular angle? But it's because of the ties to Ukraine, and then they're trying to leverage it because they're desperate to keep Trump from being reelected. They're trying to get him out of office. They're trying to keep him from being reelected. Whatever they can do to keep the bad press going on Trump, to try to, minimize the impact that he can have with his agenda, which in part is a very pro-American agenda. But in order to implement those policies good for the nation, he has to eliminate a lot of the corruption that's in the way first, drain the swamp.
Yeah, and there's a reason why, the conservative, or I'm going to use that term, I'll say Republicans. Some of the Republicans are hand in hand. Like a lot of liberals will say, well, look, even the Republicans don't like Trump. And I'm like, yeah, we understand that. Like, there's special interest on both sides that have their hand in this cookie jar that are getting paid massive amounts of money, right? I mean, we get that. So I'm going to let you finish this up, okay? I'm going to let you wrap it up, because I'm very pessimistic and you're very optimistic in some of these areas. So what is this going to look like? Just speculation. Speculation.
Total speculation.
But total speculation. But you're more optimistic in this area. I'm more pessimistic, so I'll let you frame it out. Like, as these things kind of play out downstream, do we get any resolution inside the Biden administration surrounding these things, or is it not until I firmly believe I'll say this right now. I firmly believe Trump is going to be reelected in 2024 without a doubt. Like, that's happening. People don't like that. You can bookmark this quote, right? He's going to be reelected. Does it happen now or does it happen then? Like, do we get any resolution prior to that? Is there anything happening prior to that, or is it just kind of it is what it is until then?
Well, to elevate the situation, to the precipice of World War III that we're on right now, that it feels like that we're on. The controversy continues to build, of course, and like you touched on, currently the accusations of Russia, their reasons for invading Ukraine a year ago, and what they've stated internationally before the UN, they've requested the UN subgroup to investigate further on. It's like the biological weapons treaty and things like that. That their accusation is that there are many biological research facilities throughout Ukraine, near and close to their border. I mean, being in Ukraine, it's near their border. Many of them throughout dozens of different facilities throughout Ukraine that has Western money and influence. They are international companies, but because such as some of Fauci's research on a gain of function that was illegal to pursue in the United States because it was so
if this video didn't get shut down on YouTube, it just did.
Well, these are matter of fact.
They are, but you can't say these things on here.
It's new. I mean, it's in the news. Fauci's NIH funded these. They were sending research. They were sending money to.
You have to go gain of functions, like put palsy and pain of functions. Like you have to talk like that on YouTube. Hope it don't get hit.
I mean, with all the noise in the background, we probably won't even use this video. But, hey, so.
But if you're Russia and all this that's happened with COVID over the last 2-3 years, and like this was what I was saying, that there's labs along the Ukraine border that could be these things could be weaponized, and you're sitting here going, what if they weaponize something like this? I mean, this would be way worse than a missile of any sort.
Look, when the claim first came out that Russia was accusing the West of all these biological facilities, these weapons labs, that at first they denied and said, no, there's no such thing in Ukraine. And then, a week went by and all of a sudden they're like, well, okay, yeah, there are biological research facilities, but they're not weapons labs.
They're good.
Yeah, they're for good purposes. Yeah. And they're, if anything,
make insulin.
We're doing this research in case somebody else develops a weapon, we know how to defend against it. And there's a whole rationale there for why we should pursue that kind of research.
Just needs to be on the Russian border.
Well, and it just so happens Ukraine is much more flexible and is very willing. Very willing.
That's a generous word.
Ukraine is very willing to have these millions and billions of dollars pour into their country.
And it's all out of the kindness of their heart, the same way we're in the Ukraine out of the kindness of our heart for the Ukrainian people. Right? And so just so
happens that not only was Hunter Biden involved in Ukrainian energy sector in a company like Burisma, he also happens
based upon his great knowledge of energy,
his experience in energy. He also is involved in some other companies, Meadowbiotic.
Can I guess what they might be?
And others. He and his business partners have their affiliations and their investments in.
Must have his doctorate
biological research facilities in Ukraine.
You either got to go to college or you have to have a sitting president as your father.
Yeah.
One or the other. So most people go to college. Yeah. Because it's their only path to these boards.
Hunter Biden. Yeah. Skip's class.
You keep bringing up what Skip's class to do drugs and sleep with hookers and ends up on boards of energy.
The American
corporation.
dream.
The American dream, man. So you keep bringing up Russia's what Russia keeps saying. And I'm with you. Like,
I'm just saying that's what they're saying.
No. I'm with you.
That we probably don't even realize that they're saying that.
No, I'm with you.
We're not told that.
But then on the flip side, I think, even more crazy is what we're saying the reasons we're there. Right? What are those? Like, why are we saying we're there? Like, we're not really getting clear.
Democracy?
Yeah. But I'm saying, like, we're not getting real clear, like a real cleared out, they're not being very clear on the reasons we are there either. I mean, this is not a NATO nation, right? Their only thing is like, we're there for the people. Right, we're there for the people, but that's nonsense. That's not a reason to be there.
Protect the world against Russia.
But that's not.
I mean, that's the justification.
I know, but that's just as crazy as anything else, right? I mean, we've painted Russia to be out this great threat, and for the sake of not being in World War III, we need to be there, which is actually going to lead to World War III potentially, right?
We're sending tanks.
Yeah, and now you have Zelensky coming on live television saying, Americans are going to have to send their sons and daughters here too. We're having to die for democracy, and they're going to have to die for democracy. And it's like, no, we're not. Right? But again, all I'm saying is I get your point, and I understand it. It's a good question. But you even need to look at how silly the reason that we're given too. I mean, if this was England or somebody, I would get it, right? If this was a European nation that we actually have alliances with, a NATO nation, I would understand like why we're involved. But no one's going, Ukraine? Like, why there? Like
to make the Russia's accusation all the more clear as far as what specifically they've been saying, they are saying that leading figures in the United States, especially among the Democratic Party, they have named specifically Obama, Biden, Clinton, Soros, as well as listed non-government organizations and entities that the money flows into the country through these NGOs, through government funding into these biological research facilities. It makes its way, around and through, and then they say that, then somehow money's making its way back
Biden has 60 Bitcoins in his wallet the next
Yeah, then eventually you have people like Hunter Biden getting a paycheck, for some company that he
all
he
I'm saying is what you're laying out.
But he's named them by name,
specifically,
as well as the specific accusation that the worldwide COVID outbreak is connected in some way to these research facilities.
And that's what I'm saying. You're laying out a specific claim from Russia.
Yeah, Russia
they are being very specific. We are
Russia
being very general. They are being very specific. We are being very general. In general claims, it's hard to investigate those things. It's hard to really look into generalities, right? When we say things like global democracy and freedom in the world, it's like, okay. But when someone lays out specific reasons why they're, not comfortable with what's going on, or they're angry about what's going on, you can look into those things. So my question is, why is there no investigation from our end? Of course, we know why there's not, but you ought to be asking, okay, these are specific things. First of all, why have we not heard of them? Second of all, why are we not looking into them? It's very, very easy, right? This is a very easy thing to do. So why are we not doing it? And that's what I'm saying, is that from the Russia perspective, it makes more sense of what's going on than from the United States perspective. Again, I don't love Putin.
Let's prove them wrong. Then.
Yeah, let's prove them wrong. That's right. Because they've given us an opportunity to. They've put themselves out there to go, here's specific things, prove us wrong. Whereas we're over here very general. Please don't prove us wrong. Please don't look into these things, right? Please, yeah. Right? So that's all I'm saying. Like, so for me, that's why I was trying to press into that of like, although you're saying these things, it makes more sense from that side, right? I'm not pro-Russia. I'm not pro-Putin, but I can look at information and I can look at claims being made and I can go, we look like we could be on the wrong side of this. Not America as a country, but the people in power and in the positions of power and some of the corruption that's going on there. We ought to want that to be exposed, no matter what light it paints on a world scale. Like, it doesn't matter.
No matter the difficulty that we have to face.
If America has been involved in corruption in the West, right, then that we ought to want that to be exposed, whether it's from liberals or conservatives or whoever. It doesn't matter. Truth ought to matter above party. And that's what I'm driving at. There is a truth here, and it doesn't matter if Russia has to be the one who has been historically painted out to be and has historically been at times the worst country, right? Pushing some of the worst ideas. That doesn't mean they have to be the worst right now, right? Just because they have been in the past doesn't mean they have to be right now. They could be calling out something that the world needs to know about, that the world needs to wake up to. And on this side of things, they're hoping that you won't listen to them and they can keep painting them out to be that way, and then they can paint the figure in the United States that's also been in support of calling these things out. They can paint him in with them, right? And they can draw a box around Russia and Trump and go, don't listen to anything these people say because historically they've been bad.
Yeah, understanding this issue, seeing it rightly, at least something closer to the truth, as difficult as it is to maybe put the whole picture together. It's not that difficult to see where the real corruption is and why they have. This is a huge reason why they've been so desperate to keep Trump out of power, to remove him from power, to keep him from returning to power, because he knows, and he's intent on exposing it, I believe, and rectifying it. Like you were just saying, I mean, we have to reckon with these things before we can ever move past it, past them, and get to a place where we can get back on track as our nation, dealing with our own issues internally, as well as, developing better relations and cooperative relations with the countries across the world, including Russia and Ukraine.
Amen. Amen.